Good morning. My name is Linda Mowers, and my pronouns are she and her. I'd like to welcome you to the weekly worship service of Buckman Bridge Unitarian Universalist Church. Held on our YouTube channel during this time of social distancing is one of the many ways that we're staying connected and safe. We offer many other opportunities for spiritual growth and development, religious education for all ages, small group ministries, youth programs, parent groups, and fellowship through our Zoom platform. For more information about our church and activities, keep an eye on the church website at bbuuc.org, as well as our calendar, our Facebook page, and email notices. Unitarian Universalists are united in our desire to help build a world that is more just, more equitable, and more humane for all of life, not only of ourselves. We're united in our desire that the measure of our lives be based on how we live rather than what we profess, deeds rather than creeds. If you are new to Unitarian Universalism, you can find out more at the website of our Association of Congregations, uua.org. We are glad to have you with us today and are so pleased to have the Reverend Dr. Fred Wooden as guest minister in our virtual pulpit. Reverend Wooden will offer his introduction and greeting following the lighting of our chalice with the words of Jamie A. Yandel. We light this flame to ignite the sacred power of justice. We light this flame so that it may be a beacon of hope in moments of uncertainty, fear, anxiety, and the unknown. We light this flame and are emboldened by its blaze, knowing our strength as a prophetic and powerful people is rooted in the diverse ways we answer the call to love.
Good morning, distant friends. I am Fred Wooden. I am a fourth-generation Unitarian Universalist, a 40-year Unitarian Universalist clergy person. I helped to edit one of our hymn books. I failed in my attempt to run for office, and I am now an interim minister here at Valley Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Chandler, Arizona. I bring you their greetings as well as my own. My message today will take a little extra time when I get to the sermon, but that's because the events of January 6th, well, they take a little extra time to process, I think. But I'm honored to be invited to share them with you today. Of course, every sermon is jointly made by the preacher, the people they're speaking to, and the spirit that animates us all. And sermons are part of a larger thing we call worship. So let me begin a worship service with words from one of the great spiritual voices of the 20th century, Howard Thurman. Years ago, walking along a road outside Rangoon, he wrote, "I noted at intervals along the way a roadside stone with a crock of water and occasionally some fruit, put there by Buddhist priests to comfort and bless any passerby. The fact that I was a traveler from another part of the world, speaking a strange language and practicing a different faith, made no difference. What mattered was the fact that I was walking along the road. In your own way, do you place a jar of cool water and a bit of fruit under a tree where the road turns, there to heap a needy traveler? Do you do that? God knows the answer, and so do you," says Thurman. What we do in worship is to remind ourselves that we not only need the water and the fruit as we go through life, but we need to offer it to others. And so this hour is to remind us both of the giving and the receiving. This is worship. We are here to give and to receive, and in so doing, we are blessed. Good morning and welcome to worship at this community.
There are many ways that we stay connected with each other here in our congregation. Sharing the joys, sorrows, and milestones of our lives is one way to bring the matters of your heart into the embrace of this community. During these challenging times that we're experiencing, we realize just how important it is to journey through this together as a faith community. Let us lift our hopes and our prayers for one another. Let us reach out in our solitude and remember that we all need connection, whether it's a call, a card, an email, or a text. Know, too, that your congregation is here for you should you find yourself in need of comfort or help. This is the time in our service when we pause to create sacred space in our hearts. We pause to reflect on the recent days with joys, sorrows, fears, gratitude, and love. We recall the milestones, the changes in our lives, and those who need our healing thoughts. Our community is deepened by sharing. As we light each flame, let us hold one another in our hearts. Our first flame is illuminated in concern for Marie L., who had a cardiac cath last week and is reported to be doing well. We send her our love and support. The next flame is for Sandy M., who asked that we keep her granddaughter in our hearts. She is pregnant with twins and has reached the 30-week mark. She went into labor last week, and her medical team is hoping that labor can be stalled to allow a 32-week gestation. We light a flame for our Eye Care Justice Ministry, which is going strong despite the pandemic. They are zooming in on social justice issues in our community and are happy for the support of our congregation. Our continued support of this ministry is important, now more than ever. We light several flames in celebration of our birthday milestones this week. For Nina H. and for Marilyn J., who each celebrate on February 1st. Karen C. and Ken W. each have their special days on February 2nd. Happy birthday to John S. on February 5th and to Ellen M. on the 6th. We wish each of you a joyous celebration. We light a final flame this morning for those joys, sorrows, and concerns that remain unspoken in the deeper recesses of our hearts.
Abide with me, fast falls the eventide, the darkness deepens, still with me abide, when other helpers fail and comforts flee. Help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. Swift to its close, ebbs out life's little day. Earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay in all around I see. O thou who changes not, abide with me. We need each other every passing hour, channels of grace and life affirming power, faithful companions share this path with me. Through all our fears and hopes, abide with me.
So, do you use the word prayer or not? I do. Because I think it's important that we acknowledge that what we do is religious. And it isn't merely a pause to ponder what we should be doing in the afternoon or just to shut up. It really does mean asking what matters, and am I faithful to it? The word prayer means to ask, says please. So if it pleases you, I'd like you to pray. I want you to remember those social sins of Gandhi: politics without principle, wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice. It would be easy right now to judge our world as guilty of all of them, but do not let yourself off the hook. Which of those are you guilty of? Which of those tell you need to be changing in interesting and new ways? You're not beyond redemption. Our universalist side tells us that all the time. But that does not mean you're off the hook either. We still have to find ways to be more fully ourselves and our best selves as well. So, for a prayer, here's a question. Where are you crossing your fingers? Are you political because it's fun? Are you becoming wealthy compared to the world, but without working as hard as others? Do you take pleasure just for its own sake? Do you learn but not become better? Do you worship only for the habit? Give this some thought right now. Indict yourself a little bit, because it isn't about condemnation. It's about contemplation. Look at the hard parts inside you and ask, what should I be doing to become my better self? If that's not worth a prayer, what is?
Hello and welcome to the Wonder Box. Today we have something in our box that is sweet and sticky. What do you think it could be? Here's a hint. Bzzz. If you guessed honey, you're right. I want to share a wisdom tale that comes from Burma in Thailand called A Drop of Honey. It is an old, old tale. On a warm afternoon on the second floor of a splendid palace that overlooked the marketplace of the city sat a king and his prime minister. While the king was eating some bread and honey, he looked over his land with satisfaction. What a prosperous city he ruled! What a magnificent city! As he was daydreaming, a little drop of honey dripped from his bread onto the window ledge. The minister was about to call a servant to wipe up the honey, when the king waved his hand to stop him. "Don't bother. It's only a little drop of honey. It's not our problem." The minister watched the drop of honey slowly trickle down the window ledge and land on the street below. Plop! Soon a buzzing fly landed on the sweet drop of honey. A nearby lizard shot out its long tongue and caught the lizard. The lizard was taken by surprise when a cat leapt on it, and the cat was pounced on by its worst enemy, the dog. Meowing and barking erupted from the street below the king and his minister. The minister was about to call a servant to go and deal with the brawling cat and dog when the king said, "Relax. The dog and cat belong to the market people. We shouldn't interfere. It's not our problem." The cat's owner was horrified to see her cat being attacked by a big bully of a dog and started whacking the dog with her broom. The dog's owner was horrified to see her dog being attacked by a big bully of a cat and started whacking the cat with her broom. Soon, people started coming out of their stalls and houses to see what all the screaming and shouting was about. Seeing their friend's cat being attacked, they joined in, berating the dog and its owner. Others, seeing their friend's dog being attacked by the cat, also joined in. Very quickly, the shouting became violent and a fight broke out in the street. The worried minister turned to the king, but his only comment was, "Not our problem. Here, have some more bread and honey." The king and his advisor ate as they watched the fray below. Soon the police were called in to break up the fight, but the people were so angry, each side convinced that they were right about what they really couldn't remember, they started attacking the policemen. The fight rapidly broke out into a full-scale riot. The king eyed the minister and said, "I know what you're thinking, but the army will handle it. Besides, this is not our problem." The riot swiftly escalated into a civil war with looting and destruction all over the city. Buildings were set afire, and by nightfall the magnificent city was reduced to a pile of smoking ashes. The king and his ministers stood spellbound, rooted to the spot where they had been watching all day. Their mouths were hanging open in horror. "Oh," said the king quietly, "maybe the little drop of honey was our problem." I wonder, have you ever thought that some issue was not your problem, only to discover that you were or are affected by it? What would you have done if you were the king or the prime minister? What issues do you feel powerless to change in our magnificent city? And I wonder, is there anything you or I could be doing about it? And with this, our story is told. Until the next time.
It's time for your offering. And I'd like to offer a few words to give that context. In October of 1925, Mohandas Gandhi published a list of what he called the 7 social sins in his weekly newspaper, Young India. Politics without principle was the first. Wealth without work. Pleasure without conscience. Knowledge without character. Commerce without morality. Science without humanity. Worship without sacrifice. In our tradition, we don't use the word sacrifice, but the offering represents that. And I don't mean something hard and difficult or painful. Because you see, sacrifice is actually the making of something sacred. That is what the word literally means, to make sacred. Without your gift, without it, this service of worship would be nothing but mere entertainment. It is your gift to it that makes it a worship service. Besides, there's lots better entertainment that's worth money all by itself. But you make this a sacred time by adding something of yourself to it. And when you make a gift of financial support, that is a down payment on your spiritual gift as well.
We're so grateful for the words of Reverend Wooden for our offering, and grateful to you for your continued stewardship of our congregation and our mission to create and nourish a loving community that seeks justice and respect for all. We need your support now more than ever. Your pledges ensure that we can maintain our building, our staff, and continue the many ministries of our church, even while our building is closed. Your pledges sustain us and are deeply appreciated. During this difficult time for so many, we continue to support the greater community with your virtual offerings today, which will go to Feeding Northeast Florida, the region's largest nonprofit food bank and hunger relief network. Please use the PayPal Giving Fund account link on our YouTube channel or the donate link on our website. We thank you for your generosity.
My theme this morning is waking up from the American dream, a subject I first spoke to just before the 2016 election, but I think is even more pertinent now. The story, though, begins almost 20 years ago. It was a beautiful morning in Brooklyn Heights where we lived in the 7th floor apartment owned by the First Unitarian Congregational Society of Brooklyn, where I was serving at the time. I was still in my gym clothes. It was a beautiful day and went right to my little office and was typing away when I heard a really loud noise, an unusually loud noise in a noisy city. Construction, I thought, because they were building a new courthouse a few blocks away, but in a few moments I heard people running and voices shouting. So I went to the living room and looked out, and there were the Twin Towers smoking. My wife arrived from walking our sons to school. We watched for a moment, both through the window and on television. I decided I'd better get to church, although I had no idea what good I could do. And as I was toweling off and getting ready to get dressed, I heard my wife shout. The first tower crumbled. Walking to church a few minutes later, the second tower collapsed. Debris and papers fell from the sky like a macabre ticker tape parade, covered me in crumbled concrete, and I presume pulverized bones. The next day, the New York Daily News published a front-page picture of a fire truck tearing across the Brooklyn Bridge to the smoking towers, a flag flying from behind it. We all see those flags now. But that very truck came from the firehouse near my son's elementary school, where the firemen waved as they walked by every day. Every one of them passed away. And a month later, I joined all the other neighborhood clergy in marching down the street to the little Roman Catholic church, the streets lined with firefighters, police officers, and led by the usual solemn bagpipers. Because I was such a close witness to that experience, I was asked in 2006 to write an article about it for the U World. What had we learned in 5 years? In that article I wrote, after 9/11, the structures we have occupied intellectually and spiritually crumbled. Much that we believed about our country, about ourselves, and about the world has proved untrue, but we have not really acknowledged that. We act as though the structures are still intact, enthralled by them still. Now, I use the word enthralled because it was part of a message that Abraham Lincoln sent to Congress in 1862, another time when the world was crumbling. He said then, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country." In my opinion, that event, in this case 9/11, has led us to retreat even more into the enthralling ideas of who we were. We are more enthralled than we were in 2001, defending in our hearts and in our words an idea of America that I do not believe is still pertinent. Of course, we're not unanimous, but I want to say now that the mob that assembled to hear our former president, encouraged by him to march to the Capitol, stimulated by his recurring rhetoric about restoring greatness, and aided by conspiracies to thwart him in that cause, reinforced that enthralling idea of who we are and lighted a fire that had only smoldered before. We can and should condemn his immoral exploitation of fear and frustration, but the sparks he gleefully spread that day would have been only that, sparks, without the gathering of the fuel that preceded it. And what I mean is that his party had prepared the way with a politics of denial and division that they have practiced in some form since Richard Nixon evoked the silent majority. This succeeded in part because long before 9/11, women and people of color and others who were left out and cast out for generations had dared to challenge the injustices that were there for years before. In essence, questioning the idea of of America as a land of opportunity, with liberty and justice for all, because they had not experienced that. Of course, this felt like a threat to those who had experienced opportunity and had been able to obtain liberty and justice. Many of them white, male, straight, who saw the demand for equality as a threat to their own reality, which it was, except that the reality that was threatened was not their equality or their liberty, but their supremacy. Now, I am forced by time and circumstance to sketch all too quickly a fairly complex history that itself complicates the present. Consider that those who rejected the previous president and welcomed the new one, but even now are evoking a benign version of that same vision. No, not demonic at all, but it is still a fabled city on a hill, a beacon of hope to the world, which still reeks of a certain kind of supremacy, doesn't it? The former, the demonic one, may see the idea of America as one that must be reclaimed and our hegemony that must be restored, but the other sees it even benignly as a kind of greatness that we aspire to. And neither one questions whether this idea of America as the greatest nation the world has ever seen is wise or right. Well, I'm here to answer that question and answer it with a fairly sturdy no. I wish to demolish this idea, and in so doing, proclaim our liberation from the idea that we are destined or ought to be or even should be the greatest nation on earth. This idea of America, underlying other things that we call the American dream, is not a dream at all, unless it means you have to be asleep to believe it, as George Carlin once put it. And we have slept plenty over the years. The blight of slavery was ignored or avoided for generations, right up to the Civil War, a war that took away 10% of our population. It could have been faced in 1850 or 1840 or 1830, but it wasn't. The Great Depression was not inevitable, but every effort to organize labor, to militate for fairness in workplaces, to regulate business, was resisted until it imploded the economy and plunged us into poverty and despair. Civil rights was hardly a welcome movement, even in the North, even though the rights that were being demanded were those already guaranteed by the Constitution, the same Constitution that white people revered as part of our greatness. And September 11th was not just a random attack, but in some parts the consequence of American foreign policy pursued over many years. Each calamity we have endured was born as a nation that was under an illusion or a delusion about its own greatness and goodness, that, like a dream, felt real until a rude and violent awakening. Wars, depressions, and now pandemics are like fires that start in the middle of the night. By the time the smoke and heat wakes us up, it's too late to stop it. It can only be escaped. The house is on fire, and in the confusion we stumble and shout. We even cause more damage because of the smoke and the darkness. Of course, nowadays we have smoke detectors that always need new batteries at 2 a.m, annoying us awake with their chirping insistence. They exist in figurative ways as well as the voices and actions of people who have tried to wake us up in the past. Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, James Baldwin, Betty Friedan, Audre Lorde, just to name 5 easy names. A stir from their contented slumber, and then only for a while before we go back to the sleep of enthralled contentment. Among the most recent warnings is one that came from Ta-Nehisi Coates in his startling book, Between the World and Me, where he wrote, "I have seen the dream all my life. It is perfect houses with nice lawns. It is Memorial Day cookouts, block associations, and driveways. The dream is tree houses and Cub Scouts. The dream smells like peppermint, but tastes like strawberry shortcake." You can hear the irony in it. He continues, though, "And for so long I wanted to escape into the dream, to fold my country over my head like a blanket, but this has never been an option because the dream rests on our backs, the bedding made from our bodies," referring to people of color. The extent to which his words, and those of many others, annoy America is the extent to which we know he is disturbing our dream, our sleeping dream. Coates tells us that the American dream of personal suburban contentment depends upon another American dream of power and supremacy. A personal hope for a better future depends upon a collective delusion about our greatness and our supremacy. Confusing one for the other is where the problem often lies, and to be fair, the hopeful version of the dream did make many aspire for a future that was better than the present and the past. Even Dr. King claimed the dream. John Lewis served it his whole life. Kamala Harris's parents came to America inspired by it. If you ask about the American dream, what you hear is the land of opportunity, which was true for many, but not all. You may hear the word freedom, which was true for some, but not for all. But that dream is also enlisted to justify lowering taxes so that government cannot do its job, eliminating rules that will allow businesses to flourish even as the environment is sullied, and yes, storming the Capitol when you don't like what the law says. All those voices that are not white or male or straight or Christian, are telling us that the American dream is often used to avoid reality, not because it is reality. This is something James Baldwin realized over half a century ago when he wrote, "I imagine that one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense that once the hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with their pain." Unacknowledged pain is the shadow side of the American dream. It is a secular opiate of the masses, a drug that dulls the pain but fogs the mind. And like actual opiates, we are addicted to that dream, that drugging, sleeping delusion. The cost of taking that drug has been high. We call it redlining, reservations, internments, ghettos. It is schools that do not educate. It is mass incarceration. It is environmental degradation and environmental racism, and much more. Virtually every problem we face comes from allowing the dream of America to displace the reality of America, and our preference to the drugged sleep of denial, to the pain, the very real pain of reality. All right, but having said all that, what can I do, what can we do about it when denial is our national policy? A member of my last church in Michigan gave me a book, Healing the Heart of Democracy by Parker Palmer. It was written in 2016 in response to that campaign, and his words struck deeply then. They still matter now. "I began to wonder," he writes, "what do I have in common with people who, For example, feel no need to listen to anyone who sees things differently. He goes on. Perhaps we share an abiding grief. Let that sink in. We share an abiding grief. Grief is a kind of pain, isn't it? And it's a big one. Behind the cynicism, behind the defensiveness, behind the anger, behind the binary I'm right and you're wrong, might be pain. Pain that we all have. Now, I've known grief personally. As a clergyman, I've walked to many a cemetery and walked through many a grieving life, because that's what we do. But I've also walked through it personally as I've buried grandparents, parents, and even two of my children. Grief is universal and always includes those famous feelings of denial, anger, depression, or sadness. We should start thinking of applying those to our current political situation. Maybe one reason we are so divided as a nation is because we have denied the grief and the loss that we've experienced as a nation. Maybe one of the reasons we're so angry after September 11th, but also after Vietnam and the Great Depression and the Reconstruction period and the Civil War is because we did not accept the losses, accept our grief, acknowledge our pain. Why? Because grief and loss, they make us feel weak, even ashamed. And so we choose to avoid them because we don't want to look weak. We don't want to feel shame. So we choose to avoid it by taking the opiate of the American dream, that we're always on the upward swing. And when we're not, we should be on the upward swing. And then we add to the opiate the amphetamine of grievance, that if only they, whoever they are, would get out of the way, we could be great, go back to the way we were. But as all addicts know, the drug does not cure the pain. It actually piles up, making us take more and more until we're at death's doorstep. January 6th, 2021. As a pastor, I see lots of personal and spiritual struggle, those of others and my own. When I look beyond the individuals in my care, I see a nation that is lousy at dealing with pain, loss, grief, regret. I understand why. Those feelings do make us feel weak and confused and ashamed. No one likes those feelings. We also know people, sometimes ourselves, who have refused to accept those feelings by pretending, by denying, by raging. But we cannot make pain and grief and loss go away by denying them, by masking them, by hiding them from others or ourselves. Parker Palmer realizes the only way to get past grief is to go through grief. The only way to deal with pain is to carry it. The only way to be reconciled to loss is to accept it. And that means waking up from the opiate dream that has enthralled us for generations. A dream that feels like reality, but isn't. And you know, that's what being woke really means. Of course, that phrase was instantly pilloried as so much political correctness by those who don't think they're asleep. But if we can let go of the slanginess of the term, it points back actually to a great conservative thinker, Reinhold Niebuhr, who in the middle of the 20th century wrote, "Human existence is precarious and will remain so to the end of history. In this precarious situation, our only chance of survival lies in the modest recognition of our weaknesses." Remember, that's a conservative thinker. Now, I've taken 20 minutes of your time, and I should stop, but I still have some things that need to be said, so bear with me here. Because what Niebuhr said applies to us liberals, Unitarian Universalists, not just the people who stormed the Capitol or their friends. Woke does not mean we're perfect. I'm pretty sure that anyone who thinks they're woke probably isn't, just as I'm pretty sure that those who are sure they're going to heaven probably aren't. Thinking yourself right and righteous is what theologians call hubris, which is a nicer way to say sin. The older I get, the more I like, respect, and recommend the idea of sin for liberals. Not the petty acts of selfishness and cruelty, not the selfish acts of appetite and avarice, not even the social sins of Gandhi. I mean the universal human capacity for being selfish and cruel and nasty. We can all do it. We all do it, in fact. Now, as a universalist, I do not believe in a God who will consign us to hell for being bad. No realistic person, though, can deny that we are all susceptible to cruel and selfish and violent acts, that we can all be self-righteous more than we can be humble, because we are imperfect beings. And that means everyone can be deluded, foolish, and cruel, no matter how progressive or liberal or woke they think they are. Believe me, I speak from 40 years of clergy experience and 68 years of life. And because of sin, we harm. And because we harm, we hurt. And because we hurt, we grieve. What pain can teach, if we have the courage to feel it, is that we all suffer. And we all belong then to the community of suffering. No matter how powerful or confident anyone is, we are all creatures who are hurt and cause hurt, who bear suffering and afflict it, liberals as well as conservatives, nations as well as individuals. And therein is the door to hope. Because it doesn't depend on believing something that isn't true, but accepting what is true, the community of suffering. Because that truly is universal. Think back to a time when you felt loss and grief over a parent, a spouse, a child, a friend, and people gave you comfort, especially those who had been there before. Sometimes those who were estranged softened their shell, and at least for a while, you felt they understood. Pain borne and shared opens the heart and mind. Taking this to the national level, Niebuhr again gives us some clue as to where to go. If ever a nation required the spirit of genuine contrition and humility, it is ours. He said that. He said that in the era the previous president said was when we were at our greatest. Our national soul is hurting now, and has been for a long time. From the unacknowledged grief and loss of wars and depressions, we have suffered the suffering we have handed to the native, to the enslaved, to their descendants, to LGBT folk, to women. That is the story of every nation, not just ours. But that does not excuse our nation, and it does not forgive us from the work we should be doing. Denying pain and loss is how we enthralled ourselves in the first place, numbed ourselves into a drugged slumber for over 2 centuries. If we think we can sleep through it all, forget forever, we are wrong. The last 4 years should be proof of that. We must wake up before the fire consumes us. We must feel the heat, cough in the smoke, bear the pain. But even now, how can we wake up to such a reality before the fire consumes us? What can we do? Well, that's where communities like ours, houses of worship, are uniquely empowered to be leaders, especially when our leaders will not lead. No illusory hope and pie-in-the-sky promises here, but we need a faith that understands contrition and humility as the path toward hope. To borrow ironically from the evangelical community, if we wish to be saved, we must first confess our sins. By exquisite good fortune, I chanced upon a remark by the biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann, who summarizes my remarks in one sentence. I could have saved you 25 minutes right away. He wrote, "The prophetic tasks of the church are to speak the truth in a society that lives in illusion. Grieve in a society that practices denial, and express hope in a society that lives in despair." Could there be a better calling for our task now? But not just to the world, to ourselves. And it begins, remember, with confession, not condemnation. Yes, we use love to be the righteous prophet, but we are also in need of prophecy. We stand in need of humbling, lest we become intoxicated by our own sense of moral supremacy. Only those who know the pain they have inflicted can heal that pain in others. Only those who have borne guilt and shame can touch someone else's with permission. It's very much the way of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is why it's so effective. A clergy colleague once remarked that Alcoholics Anonymous is the true church, and I think she's right. They know that we are saved by the communion of the fallen, not the army of the righteous. Now, I'm using way too much time, but I got to get to this. Harvey Milk once said you got to give him hope, and I'll end on a hopeful note. There is a real American dream, and we all know it's out there because Dr. King was not wrong. It was since, howbeit dimly, 250 years ago. It has been sharpened by pain and tested by grief many times. It has been captured by poets and prophets down to our day. It is our covenant as a nation, the promise we have made and broken again and again. It's the one that indicts our sins and invites our faith. And it is 5 simple words created by a young Baptist minister 125 years ago. It comes at the end of those very words school children in Congress recite on an almost daily basis: liberty and justice for all. That is what we're about. If we rouse ourselves from the false dream of greatness and grandeur and wealth and power, and instead pursue liberty and justice for all, this dream could happen. Not because we are great, not because we deserve to be great, but because those who are willing to serve that vision, that hope, that promise could be great. And that is the real American dream. Liberty and justice for all. We are far away yet, but we could get closer. And communities like ours are midwives of that hope. I pray we as a movement, you and your congregation, me and mine, find the courage of contrition to each other and with ourselves, to find and claim the greatness of bearing grief rather than denying it, and take up the mantle of humility, which is the path to hope.
We will not stop singing. We will not stop singing. We will not stop singing till the world can hear the song, till the world can sing along. We will not stop marching. We will not stop marching. We will not stop marching till the world can hear the song, till the world can sing along. Till the world can sing, till the world can sing, till the world can sing along. Till the world can sing, till the world can sing, till the world can sing along.
We will not stop
Well, I want to thank you for letting me join with you today in worship. I'm so sorry I can't be with you in person, and perhaps someday I'll have that honor. But I'd like to leave you with some words found in our gray hymn book. As I mentioned, I helped to edit this gray hymn book, so it's very dear to me. And in particular, the readings, which I was in charge of putting together with a lot of help, of course. The words I'm choosing are those you would find as responsive reading number 648, but I want to read them to you. They are the words of the wonderful British poet Denise Levertov. Hopeful words. But we have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. How can desire fail? We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy. Only begun to envision how it might be to live as siblings with beast and flower, not as oppressors. Surely our river cannot already be hastening into the sea of non-being. Surely it cannot drag in the silt all that is innocent. Not yet, not yet. There is too much broken that must be mended, too much hurt that we have done to each other that cannot yet be forgiven. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. If that is not our calling and our hope, I don't know what is. I hope the week for you gives you reason to continue, and that you gather again 7 days hence, ready for another journey of the Spirit. So may it be, and amen.
We now extinguish our chalice with words by Reverend Krista Taves. It is our work shared with each other in covenant that creates and sustains this beloved community. We extinguish this chalice, but its light lives on in the directions we have chosen today. The light of this faith lives on in us together, in our hearts, minds, bodies, and spirits. Amen, and blessed be.